Good evening, everyone. So we'll be waiting for 5 more minutes for all the attendees to join, and then we'll be starting with the session. In the meanwhile, Cecil, are you present here?
Yeah, I'm there.
Okay. So, Cecil, while we're waiting for the participants to join, may you please share the link of those notebooks? First
Yeah,
of all,
sure.
first of all, please share the link of the notebooks for NumPy, Pandas, and Matplotlib. They're in the chat section. Thank you so much, Cecil, for sharing. And also, the thing is, now every one of you present here who wish to have a hands-on as well for this session. So since ML is all about learning and experimenting, isn't it? So all of you present here who wish to have a more meaningful session, who wish to make a more meaningful use of this session, what I would request you is please open the chat section, and there Cecil has shared 3 notebook links, collab notebook links. So please open those links one by one. My friend Apoorv will start with the session on NumPy. So in the order will be NumPy, then Pandas, then Matplotlib. So go up to that relative link, whatever Cecil has shared, and please open that link and copy this notebook in your drive. Copy the notebook in your drive, because for this link, whatever Sazal has shared, for that the attendees have the viewer's permission, so you can't be able to just make changes directly there. So I would request all of you who wish to have this hands-on experience to open the notebooks in order, NumPy, Pandas, and then Matplotlib, and copy those in your drive. So once you have copied it in your drive, then you'll be able to make the changes there and experiment there. Okay. So please, everyone, go ahead. Well then, since it's 6:35, we shall officially begin with our session today on Introduction to Machine Learning. So, good evening everyone. I'm Shivam Jha, the coordinator of Gray Interface ML team at Hackslash. And we present before you the fourth day of Hacktober week, which is organized by Hackslash under the banner of Hacktoberfest. The fourth day being an introduction to ML. Now, since the last 3 days, we have been having sessions, and you might be well aware with what actually Hacktoberfest is, isn't it? So it's a month-long open source contribution program organized by DigitalOcean with the most valuable partners, AppWrite, Intel, DeepSource, as you can see here on the screen, and the Hackslash Club of our institute. It has taken an initiative to conduct these in this 7 days. It aims to conduct 7 workshops to help you get an understanding, a head start in each respective domain of development world, so that you can also become someday a valuable open source contributor in the society. So we'll begin with our session today, and this is our topic for today: Introduction to Machine Learning. And the speakers for today are me, Shivam Jha, and my friend Apoor Wankar, a Gray Interface member. Now, starting from here, I'll hand over to Apoor to continue further. So Apoor will be covering the basics of Python libraries, and then I'll be back to introduce you, to give you a hands-on, and to let you know about what machine learning actually is. Okay, I wish you all the very best and hope that it will be an interesting session for each one of you present here. Apoor, please.
Okay, thank you, Shivam. So good evening, everyone. So the topics we will be covering for this session are some basic libraries of Python, that is the NumPy library, Pandas, and the Matplotlib. We will be discussing about supervised and unsupervised learning. We will be learning what is cost function, what is gradient descent, and at last we will be having hands-on on linear regression and logistic regression. So let's move on. So what is NumPy? So NumPy basically stands for numerical Python and is a Python library used for working with arrays. So basically a library is a tool used for performing specific task in our program. So for example, here NumPy has functions for working in domain of linear algebra, Fourier transform, and matrices. And you can find the source code for NumPy at this following GitHub repository. So you can check it out. So beginning with NumPy arrays. So NumPy arrays basically has 2 parts. That is, first part, that is vectors. Vectors is basically a one-dimensional array, and the second one is the matrices. As we all know, is a 2-dimensional array. So matrices can also have a single row and one column. So okay, so let's move on to the Google Colab notebook to get hands-on NumPy. Okay, I recommend you all to open your own NumPy notebook on Google Colab. So first of all, we will load NumPy. So for loading NumPy, if we are running it on your local device, so you must make sure to install NumPy first. So you can install NumPy by using the following command, pip install NumPy. But I recommend you all to use the Jupyter notebook as it is more friendlier than Colab. But for this session only, we will be using Google Colab. So first of all, we will be importing NumPy. So here import NumPy as NP. So NP here is a shortened form of NumPy. As we will be using it more often in our program, so we have used a shortened form. So we will be running this cell. So here we are, okay, so here we are initializing the array. So we can initialize an array by using the dot array function. So we have initialized an array A with the function dot array, and we have inputted the value as 1, 2, and 3. So we will print the array. So we have got the array 1, 2, and 3, and this is a one-dimensional array. If we want to print a two-dimensional array, we will use the same command dot array function, and we will input two arrays. That is here we have the float values 9, 8 and 7, and here 6, 5 and 4. So it is a two-dimensional array of the size 2 cross 3. So we will also run this cell. And so to get the dimension of an array or any array, we will use the dot ndim function. So the dot ndim function gives us the dimension. Suppose we have used a dot ndim, so we have got the 1, as this is a one-dimensional matrix. Similarly, if we do b dot ndim, so I will run this cell. So we have got 2. So as we can see, it is a two-dimensional array. Now to get the shape of a matrix, we will use the dot shape function. So we have used b dot shape. So we have got 2 and 3, as it contains 2 rows and 3 columns, as we can see here. If I use a dot shape, we will expect it to see 1 and 3. So here 3 specifies that this is only one-dimensional array, which means that it is a vector. Okay. Now to get data type of any array, we will use the function .dtype. So by default, the data type of any array is of the format integer 64-bit. But you can also specify here another data type. Suppose I want a data type integer 32-bit. So I will specify here as dtype equals to int 32. Okay. So it will be our data type in 32-bit. So here I will run .dtype. Okay, so here we have got that it is of data type integer 32-bit. To get the size of that, the size of each of the elements, we will use the dot item size function. So a dot item size we will get as 4. So as we know, the size of each integer is 4 byte. We have got the size of each item to be 4. To get this total size of the array, we will use dot n byte. So a dot n byte will give us 12. As we can see here, there are 3 elements, and the size of each element is 4 bytes. So we got in total 12 bytes. To get the number of elements in a specific array, we will use the dot size function. So a dot size will give us 3, as we can see, there are only 3 elements. Now accessing or changing specific elements, rows and columns. So suppose we have initialized here a 2D array, np.array a, and we will run this here. Okay. To access a specific element, we use the format r(c). We specify rows and columns. So we must remember that indexing starts from 0. So here a1,5 specifies that we are accessing the second column and the element as position 6. So here second row is 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 and 14. And the sixth element is 13. So we have got 13 here and here again. So if you want to get a specific row, so suppose I want to get the first row. So I have defined the position index 0, and to include all the elements we use columns. So suppose I want to take the first row and include all the elements. So I will specify it by columns. And similarly, for to get a specific column, I will use columns for getting all the elements in the specific column. And here 2 is the position index from which I want the column from. So here I have got at the position 3, 3 and 10. So here we have got that. So examples of some 3D arrays. So here we have initialized a 3D array. Note that we have 3 square brackets, so we can see that it is a 3D array. So we will run this there. And to access a specific element, we will work from the outside to the inside. So suppose we want to, suppose here we have b 0, 1, 1. So here we will be accessing the first box, and position 1 we will be accessing 3, 4, the array 3, 4, and at position 1 the element is 4. So we have got here 4. Okay, so initializing different types of array. So suppose we in some scenarios we may want a matrix with all elements 0 or with all the elements 1, or we may want it to be all elements to be some specific number. So there are some functions for that also. So if we use the dot zeros command, we will get all the elements to be 0. So we have to define the size of the matrix as the parameter in the function. So 2, 3 specifies the size. To get all the elements as 1, we will use the dot ones function, and here we have specified the data type. So here we have a 3D matrix. To specify any other number, we will use the dot full function, and here we have specified the size, and here the number with which we want to fill the matrix with. Okay, now we can also get an identity matrix with the function dot identity. So dot identity, as we know, an identity matrix has the same number of rows and columns, so we need to specify only a single parameter. So suppose I have specified the parameter 5, so np.identity5 will give me an identity matrix of size 5 cross 5. Okay, now let's move on. So we must be careful while copying arrays. So there is a specific function to copy an element from one matrix to another matrix, and that function is the dot copy function. You must also be wondering that why we are using copy function when we can directly copy b equals to a. So here we have an array a, and here we have elements 1, 2, and 3. If we copy the element a directly into the b, so if we are changing the element at the index 0 by 100, and if you check the output, so okay, we see that the original array and the new array both are same, so the original array also gets changed, but we don't want that to happen. We want the original array to remain intact, so there is a dot copy function. So if we use the dot copy function, it will help to cope with the problem. So here see that the original array remains intact, so we must be careful while copying these arrays. So there is some mathematics in these arrays, and it is very quite easy. So suppose we have the array A, and it is initialized by np.array, and the elements are 1, 2, 3, and 4. So if you use +2, a +2, 2 will be added to each of the elements of the array. Here we have 3, 4, 5, and 6. If we do -2, 2 will be subtracted from each of the element. If we do multiplied by 2, 2 will be multiplied to each of the element. By 2, 2 will be divided by each of the element. And if we have another array of the similar size, and if we add both of the arrays, so the consecutive elements will be getting added. So here 1 + 1, 2, and 2 + 0, 2, and similarly all the elements. And if we do power of 2, so each elements will be getting squared. And you can find more of these methods at the following documentation. You can check this site if you want to explore more of the mathematics. And let's move on to the linear algebra part. So suppose I have specified a matrix C, and that is an identity matrix of size 3 cross 3. We have used a similar command before also. So to get the determinant, we will use the np.linearalgebra.determinant, which has a parameter of the matrix that is to be inputted. So we have inputted the identity matrix key. So we will be getting a determinant of value 1. So you can specify any other matrix. So we can also find trace, singular vector decomposition, eigenvalues, matrices, and inverse, etc. So you can, if you want to perform these operations, you can check this documentation. And reorganizing arrays. So suppose we have two vectors of arrays, that is v1 and v2, and we want to make a 2D array. By reorganizing these two vectors v1 and v2, we can use the .vstack function. So here I have used a .vstack functions and organized the array in the format v1, v2, v1, and v2. So we have got a 2D matrix, and here we can see we have got a 2D matrix, and v1, v2 are organized in the way we wanted it to be. Okay, now let's move on to the next library. So let's move towards the pandas. So what is Pandas? So Pandas is basically an open source Python library used for providing high performance, easy to use data structure and data analysis tools for the Python programming language. So we can accomplish the 5 steps in processing and analysis of data using Pandas. That is, we can load, prepare, manipulate, model, and analyze our data. So Python with Pandas has a wide range of applications in many fields, including finance, economics, statistics, and analytics. So data structures in Pandas. So Pandas basically deals with the following 3 data structures. That is the series, data frame, and the panels. So a series is basically a one-dimensional labeled array, and it is capable of holding only one data type. So that is integer, string, float, or objects, etc. And data frame is basically a two-dimensional data structure, and data is stored in a type of tabular form, which contains rows and columns. And panels is a three-dimensional data structure, and it is used less frequently than series and data frame, and it is very difficult to visualize. So let's move on to data frame. So here we have a data frame. So our data frame can be created using the following constructor, pandas.dataFrame. So here the parameters are the data, index, columns, data type, and copy. We don't need to specify the data type and copy. These three might work. Okay. So let's move on to the Google Colab notebook to get some hands-on on pandas. Okay, here I have pandas. Let me reconnect. Okay. Meanwhile, okay. So here I have a CSV file. So basically, an Excel file is of the format .csv. So here I have a CSV file, Pokemon data.csv. I will open it up. Okay. So the Pokemon data.csv file has different Pokemon characters, and here we can see that they have different stats. So they have HP, attack, defense, and different stats. So we will be loading this Excel file in our notebook. So we will be using, basically we will be using pandas to load this Excel file. So we will be using import pandas as PD. So PD here is the shorthand form for the pandas. So to load a file into our notebook, we will use the .read CSV command. So a .read CSV command has the parameter of the name of the file. So here we can see the .read CSV, and the parameter is the name of the file, Pokemon data.csv, as we can see here. And to check that if we have loaded the file successfully, we have accessed the column HP, as you can see here, the HP column. We are trying to access it. If it is accessed, the file has loaded successfully. So as we can see, we are able to see the HP column, that is 45, 60, 80. So we have successfully loaded pandas, our file, into our notebook. So reading data in pandas. So by using the .column function, we are able to access the headers of each of the element of this file. So we are able to access the name, type 1, type 2 HP by using the .column command. Now suppose if we want some specific number of column to be selected, so we will use the .ilog function. So here we have used the .ilog function, and if you want these first two columns to be selected, that is the hash and the name, that is the index and the name. So here the first position is occupied by the rows, and the second position is occupied by the columns. So previously in NumPy, I have told you that by using columns, we select all the elements in the specific column. So we have used columns to specify that we want to select all these elements, and 0 column 2 specifies the position from where we want to select the column will the position we want to select. So 0. Note that the first position is inclusive and the second position is exclusive, meaning that the columns that will be selected are 0 and 1. The second column will be not be selected. So the columns that will be selected are hash and name. So these are index 0 and 1. So here we have accessed X. So here we have got the index and the name. Now there are various operations that we can perform on the elements in a specific column. So suppose there is the HP column, and we can find the sum of all the elements of these columns by using the dot sum command. So we have accessed the HP column, and we have used the dot sum command to get the sum of all the elements of the HP column. So the total is 55,407. Similarly, to get the average, we will use the dot mean command. So here we have used the dot mean. We have got the average of all the elements, that is 69.258. To get the median, we will use the dot median function. So we have got the median to be 65, and we can find mode. Well, there is a formula for the mode. So okay, now creating a data frame. So suppose we have a sample data, that is we have initialized a data array. Here has values 10, 20, 30, 40 and 50. So suppose we have to make this in a tabular form. So we will use the dot data frame function. So we have used the dot data frame, which has an input of the data. So here data will be arranged in a tabular form. So by running this command, we will see that it is arranged in a tabular form. Okay. Now we have another data, that is it has the student's name and the marks. So here we have arranged them in a tabular form. So here the first student in John, and he has marks 90. So we have, as we have seen in the above command, we will similarly use the dot data frame function, and we will be specifying the data. And here there are the columns, that is the name and the marks. So here it is arranged in a tabular form, as we can see here, name and marks, and the first student is shown and marks 90, and that's it. Okay. Now suppose there is a new entry of the student, and we want to add that in our previous data frame. So we will use the dot append function. So the dot append function basically does what it does is it adds a new entry into the previous entry that we had. So the Tom 92, there is a new student Tom, and he has marks 92, and it will be added to the previous inputs that we had. So it will be added to the data. And okay, so here we have again initialized pd.data frame, and again, as we can see, the new student has been added. Okay, so that's it for the pandas. And now we will move to the final library, that is our matplotlib. So matplotlib is a low level graph plotting library in Python that serves as a visualization utility. So it is basically used for visualizing. Well, you can use it to visualize the input data for various CSV files, and you can also use it to visualize the output of various complex machine learning algorithms, and it is quite useful. So you can to know more, you can visit this site to know more about matplotlib. Okay, so moving towards matplotlib pyplot. So pyplot is basically a sub library of the matplotlib module. So we can plot various graphs like the line plot or histogram, scatter, 3D plot, image, contour and polar by using the pyplot module. So it is quite helpful. And here is a sample program for the linear graph that I have drawn. So we have imported matplotlib, and .matplot here states that it is a sub library belonging to matplotlib module, and SPLT is a shorthand notation. We have also imported dumpy to perform array functionalities. So we have defined the points on the x-axis as x points and the points on y-axis as y points. So these are array of points having values 2 and 6, and the y points are value 0 and 250. So we will use the dot plot function. It doesn't matter what we will rename this as x points or whatever variable you want it to be. But here dot plot, we will specify the first position by the x coordinates and the second position by the y coordinates. So we will use plt.show to show us the graph. Okay, now let's move on to our matplotlib notebook to get hands-on on matplotlib. Okay, let me reconnect it. Okay, so here we will be loading the necessary libraries. So here we will be importing matplotlib.pyplot as PLT, as you know already. We will be also be importing numpy because we want to perform the array functionalities, and we will also be importing pandas as we want to load the CSV file. So I will run this. Suppose so the first graph is our linear graph. So you have seen it before also, so let me show it to you again. So suppose we have the x points as array of values of points 1, 2, 3 and 4, and on the y-axis we have the points 2x, so that is twice the value of x. So we will basically get a line of slope 2. So we will use the plt.plot function, and to get the x label as x-axis, we will use the x label function and rename it as x-axis. To get the y-axis label, we will use the dot y label, and it will be labeled on y-axis. And to get the title, we will use the y-axis label. So here we have shown the title. So you will be learning more about this linear algebra when Shivam tells you about more about the linear regression. You will understand why we are learning more about this pyplot thing. So let's move. Okay, now to the bar chart. So suppose we have three labels A, B and C, and the values of A are 1, 4 and 2 respectively, A, B, C. So we will initialize this figure by using the dot figure function, and we will set the figure size 5,3 and DPI equals to 100. So DPI basically is dots per inch or pixels per inch. So as you can see, the pixels here are set to 100. So pixels per inch, that is 100. So we have used the parse parameter. So we have set the parse equals to plt.par and the labels and values as the inputs. So basically the labels are on the x-axis and values are on the y-axis. And if you want these patterns, so we have set the patterns equals to slash circle and this star. So here we have, so first of all we need to iterate through each of these patterns, and we will use these patterns to patterns on our bar graph. So we will use a for loop. So for bar in bars, so it will be iterating through each of the value in the bar, and bar dot set hatch. So set hatch basically does is that it will print this pattern that you are able to see this slash circle and the star on our bar graph. So bar dot set hatch, and the input is patterns dot pop at position index 0. So many of you must have known the dot pop function. So pop function basically what it does is it removes the value whatever the value is at the index 0. So first of all it will remove the slash and it will get a remove, then it will remove this O, and then it will remove the star. And we can also use the dot save figure. So it will save the figure in the format .png in our file. So and plt.show shows us the graph. So as you can see, the bar graph.png is saved in my files here. Okay, now let's move on. So okay, so in real world example, so let's say a real world example. So I have a FIFA data I found on the internet. So here is a FIFA data. Let me show you. Mm, the file is too big and can't be open on Google Colab, so I'm opening it on Excel. So here there are different IDs, and let me zoom in a bit, and there are different players, that is Neymar, etc. And here they are nationality, flag, overall, and their potential, club, etc. and different stats. So here is an overall column we will be dealing with. So let's get back into our notebook. So here we have loaded the data by using the again .read CSV command. We have loaded the CSV file into our Python notebook. So here .read CSV FIFA.csv FIFA data.csv. As we can see, FIFA data.csv is the name of the file, and .head function. So .head function, what it basically does is it shows us the top if the input is n, so it shows us the top n rows of the CSV file. So by default, the value is 5, but I am inserted it 5. But if you don't show it, by default it will also be 5, I think. Yes. And if you specify it to be 8, it will show us the first 8 rows. Okay, till 7. Okay, so that are the first 8 rows. Okay, now let's move on. So suppose we have to plot a histogram. So okay, let me stop here for a minute. Okay, I need to tell you something that you don't need to remember each of these commands. So these commands, if they don't need to be remembered. If you just want to plot a histogram, you can just Google it, like you can refer the documentation. So histogram matplotlib. I myself refer to the documentation, and at the original site matplotlib.org, you can refer to the documentation. So here matplotlib.pyplot.hist. So .hist is the function to plot a histogram, and here, as we can see, let me zoom in a bit. Okay, as we can see, .hist function has the following parameter x beans, and there are many parameters. We don't need to define each of them. So let's move on to our notebook. So here, this is the beans parameter. So as we can see, there is also a beans parameter, as we can see here. Here also beans. Okay, so the beans parameter basically shows us the interval. So you can see the interval 40, 50, 60, 70, and 80. That is the interval. So we need to specify it in a beans array. So we will initialize the figure by showing plt.figure, and the figure size is 8,5. And we will use the .hist function to get a histogram. So we have used basically three inputs. So we have set the beans, that is the intervals, and the first is FIFA.overall. So let me show what FIFA.overall is. So FIFA is our file, and FIFA.overall is basically this column overall. So we will be basically plotting this overall column in our histogram. So here this is the FIFA.overall. Beans equals to, we have set the beans equals to beans, that is this, and we have set the color equals to hash ABCDEF. So well, you can also find the color codes online also. You can set any color code. If you want a specific color, you need to specify by typing hash and the code. So you can find it online on many websites. And here xsticks. So xsticks is used to basically plot these beans on the x-axis. So we have also inputted it beans, and to get the y label. So y label is the number of players. To get the number of players, we have used the .y label function. To get the x label, so x label is skill level. We have set the x label equals to skill level. And to get the title, we have set the title distribution of player skills in FIFA 2018. And again, we have set the figure by using the histogram.png as the format.png. And let me run it. So here we have got the histogram.png in our file set. Okay, now let's move on to the pie chart. So basically the pie chart we can use again you can look up on the documentation. So suppose I want a pie chart. Okay, so basic pie chart. Okay, you can again refer to this documentation to get the pie chart. And here we can see the left, we have set the left equals to people with the preferred foot equals to left, and right equals to FIFA.log preferred foot equals to right. So here we have players with their preferred foot, as we can see in the column left right. So okay, and we have used the dot count function, so it will basically increase their count as this condition is satisfied. Preferred foot equals to left, or is equal to right, and we have set the figure size equals to 8,5, and labels equals to left comma and left and right. So these are labels left and right. We have set the color code, so it is blue, and here it is color. So you can set any other color you want, and we have used the .py function, so you can refer to the documentation to get to know more about this function. And we have first specified this as left and the right, so that is on the, here we have left and this is right, and we have set the labels parameter equals to labels and colors parameter equals to colors. And here auto PCT, it is also a parameter, you can check the documentation again. So the auto PCT, basically what it does is it gives us the uh, percentage value in percentage of each of these price. So 0.2f basically gives us the float value up to 2 decimal places. So is 23.19 and 76.81. And we have set up the title food preferences of FIFA players, and we have said plt.show. Okay, I have not saved the figure, but you can also save the figure in your local file. So now what I want you all to do is here is a box graph. So this is a box plot. I want you all to when there is time, you can try it yourself at your home, and refer the documentation, and from this documentation you can plot this figure yourself by yourself. So it's not difficult at all. So now I will be asking my friend Shivam to continue. And he will be telling you more about the supervised and unsupervised learning.
Well, thank you so much, Apur. That was really an interesting hands-on about the basic building blocks. I mean, in fact, these libraries, I would like to say to everyone, each one of our present here, I would like to say one thing, that these libraries which Apur explained, NumPy, Pandas, and Matplotlib, these are essentially the building blocks of feature engineering, data science, and then consequently machine learning. So we would thank Kapoor for that. And now, first of all, my apologies. I just, it came to my mind that most of you here, some of you, maybe not even acquainted with what Google Colab is. So if there's anyone here who doesn't have introduction to what Google Colab is, so Google Colab is basically an interactive Python IDE. Google Colab is an IDE where you can run your bits of Python code separately. There's no need to make one Python file together and compile it and run it in a single go. You can run your bits of code. I mean, each function can be run differently. And similarly, the plotting of graphs and some visualizations that can be done in the IDE itself. So that's a very helpful thing. And now regarding the copying of notebooks, which I said you, let me share my share my screen. Okay, is my screen visible? Apur, can you please confirm?
Yeah, it's visible.
Okay.
Now,
Now,
move
suppose,
it to full screen.
isn't it full screen?
Yeah, it's okay.
Now, suppose I copy a link for this logistic regression notebook. I copy the link and I paste it in my browser. So, yeah, so it will open up something like this. where it shows changes will not be saved. Why not saved? Because I am a viewer. I have a viewer permission for this notebook and I can't change this notebook. So if I need to make a copy, I'll just simply click this button here, copy to drive. And once I do this copy to drive button, it will create a local copy for me of this notebook in my drive. Now, yeah, this notebook will now be created in my drive and now it will show changes will be saved. Okay. Yeah, last saved. See, so this is where I can make the changes. I can edit this notebook, not in this global copy. This is my local copy of the notebook which I made. So that was about this Google Colab, and now let's move with our session. Okay. So our third point of order is supervised learning. Supervised learning and in fact unsupervised learning also. So what essentially learning is? Learning is when an agent here your computer is able to understand the facts. It's able to understand the changes happening in its surrounding and act accordingly. That is essentially learning. Now, learning in terms of machine could be of two types: supervised learning and unsupervised learning. So as the term suggests, supervised learning, what it is, supervised learning is when you interfere in the learning process of your system. How you interfere? See, first point, supervised learning is the process of making an algorithm to learn to map an input to a particular output, okay, by human interference, by outside interference of an agent. So how we will interfere in this learning? This is achieved by providing correct labels during training of model on a data set. So essentially what we do here is, for supervised learning, we'll be dealing with linear regression. So let's suppose in the linear regression, we'll be dealing with a data set of house price predictions. So what that data set is, it's a data set of house prices, houses sold in California state of North America, USA, and for each house you have a list of several features like the number of bedrooms in the house, the locality of the house, the population density near the house, and based on every such feature there's a label of selling price, that what given all those features, what was the final price that the house was sold for. So what essentially we do in supervised learning is, while training the model, we give it the features of a house along with the actual price that the house was sold for. So what our model tries to do is, our model tries to predict the price based on those features, so price which is almost equal to the historical data, the actual price that the house was sold for. That is our target in supervised learning. Okay. Third point, if the model's predicted value does not match the given actual label, not exactly match, but if it's not about a certain range deviation, so we define a range that okay, if the deviation is more than this range, then update the model's parameter and train it again. So we do this until we achieve a minima in errors. This term minima in errors is quite an essential term. It itself is a whole topic of machine learning, which is cost function and gradient descent. We'll talk about it in a bit. Now, moving on to unsupervised learning. So what unsupervised learning is? Now, unsupervised learning is a process of learning without external interference. And what do I mean by the word external interference? By the word external interference, I essentially mean the historical data. Okay, so for unsupervised learning tasks, you don't have the historical data present with you. You just have a set of data, and depending upon the similarity of features between each entry, you take, suppose you have 10 entries. You go through the features of all those entries, and based upon the similarity of their features, you try to predict something. Let's suppose I have a data of hospital employees. Okay, the data has features like at what time the employee leaves, at what time the employee comes, and how many emergency cases the employee has tended to. So these are certain features of each hospital employee, and based on these features, I need to predict that whether or not the employee is a sincere employee or not. Okay, so essentially what I need to do is, I need to divide my whole data set of employees into two classes: sincere employee and insincere employee. So what I'll do is, I'll obviously not have any historical data. I mean, no hospital goes on to classify its employees as sincere or not sincere. It's obvious. So you won't have a historical data for who was sincere since the last 5 months and who was not sincere. You will just have a trend of features like coming time, arrival time, departure time, number of emergencies attended, and comments from the patient. You will have all such data, and you'll need to find the trends in these data, and finally, out of the blue, you need to label each employee as either sincere or not sincere. Okay. Now, secondly, as a natural consequence, actual labels are not provided and prediction is self-made and based on the observed trends in data. And the third point, you have no empirical means to measure the error in your predictions. That's for sure. That's obvious. So how you'll measure an error? You'll measure an error only when you have the actual label. You have the true data, the historical data. Then you'll compare your predicted values with the historical data and measure the error accordingly. But if you don't have any historical data to start with, there's no question about having empirical means to measure the error in your predictions. And in fact, it may happen that let's suppose we have an employee X, and for 5 runs, for 5 predictions, my model predicts that hospital employee to be a sincere employee. It can also happen that in the 6th run, it will predict him as an insincere employee. So there's a difference here also. So these are some drawbacks of unsupervised. I mean, not exactly drawbacks, but if you always have to you have to have a trade-off between good things and bad things in life. So that's basically it. Now moving ahead with that minimum of errors term, which is essentially known as cost function and gradient descent in the analogical terms for machine learning. Now what cost function is? Cost function is an expression which tells how poorly a model has performed on predicting values while training. Okay, so now genuinely, if you may ask that, so what is a cost function? A cost function is basically to tell you that how error prone your model is. What's the degree of error that your model is doing while making decisions, while making predictions. And naturally that cost function will vary according to the use of your model. Let's suppose we have the first example in the cost function here. If you see the first example, mean squared error, this is the cost function for linear regression. Now if we talk about linear regression, what you do in linear regression is the predictions made are continuous variables. Okay, when they are floating point numbers, the predictions are not natural numbers or they are not categorical variables. They are numbers on a real line. Essentially, they are numbers on a real line, float 32 or float 64. So for continuous variables, you define mean squared error as the cost function. It's one of the most standard cost function for linear regression tasks. So what you will do is you will have a predicted value for each feature and the actual value that was given to you. You will do the subtraction there. That difference is the error, and then you will square it. You will square and add the square of error for each observation, and then totally divide it by the total number of observations. That is mean squared error. Similarly, for logistic regression, we have binary cross entropy, also known as the log loss, binary cross entropy or the log loss function. So what this binary cross entropy now is, see, logistic regression is for predicting values between 0 and 1. Logistic regression function always predicts the values between 0 and 1. So what's the are you getting the intuition here? So that 0 and 1 basically is probability for anything to happen. We use logistic regression for classification tasks. Now what classification is? Classification is, let's suppose here we are using the Titanic dataset to demonstrate logistic regression in this intro to ML session. So in that Titanic dataset, for each person who had planned their doomful journey on the Titanic ship, infamous Titanic ship, for each of such person we have features like the age of the person, the sex of the person, and the class in which he was traveling, first class, second class, third class, the name of the person, and the ticket number, and every other stuff. So based on all those features, there are also columns like whether the person was alive or dead after the Titanic tragedy. So that is a classification task where you have to classify something based on the features that you have received. Here our classification target is survival or death, 0 or 1, survived or not. Okay. So for classification tasks are always if you input the features in the logistic regression function, it always outputs the value between 0 and 1. That is the probability. Now, if the probability is between 0 to 0.5, we say it as no, the person is dead. And if the output probability is above 0.5 and less than 1, I mean, obviously it will be less than 1 only. So we'll say that the person is alive. That is essentially the intuition about logistic regression. And for that logistic regression, the cost function here is binary cross entropy. Now, when I say minima in errors, the first natural thing that comes to our mind, as you know, as students having learnt calculus for almost 2 years or 3 years, the first thing that comes to our mind is minimizing the slope of curve. That is what gradient descent is. Gradient means the differential of the curve. So this cost function, the graph for this cost function, when you see suppose for linear regression, these are cost function, mean squared error, and this is our graph for the mean squared error function. Now, if you want to achieve a minima in this mean squared error function, the minima comes here, as you can see. So what we will do is, for achieving this minima, we'll first take out the derivative of our cost function. So in this case, the cost function is MSE. So we'll take out the derivative of MSE. And then after taking out the derivative of MSE, we'll increase the value of this x little by little, such that the derivative reaches to as close to 0 as possible. The moment it again crosses 0, let's suppose it started from the negative side. It started from the negative side, the slope has started negative. Now less, and at any instant when it turns positive, so we stop the iteration there, and we say that yes, this is the most optimum value of x where the minima has been attained for the cost function. So that is our best case model, best case prediction. Okay. And after we have the predictions, then we plot a graph between the actual labels that we had versus our predicted values. The x-axis is our predicted values, which came out as a result of predictions, and y-axis is the actual values of the houses. Suppose the house price. So then, if we get a straight line, these are the points. These are discrete points plotted, and if these points are almost in a straight line, then we say that yes, our linear regression model is working well and good. Similarly, for logistic regression, this is our function, binary cross entropy or log loss function. So this is quite complicated. You can dive deep into the math later if you wish to. And this is the graph for the function above. For the binary cross entropy function, this is the graph. It's a 3D graph. And similarly, we perform gradient descent in this curve and try to achieve this minima, where the model is working best. Now, this is the activation function. This is the logistic regression function that I was talking about. See, for x ranging from -infinity to +infinity, the values for this is always between 0 and 1. Okay, so this is essentially the function. This z is the combination, linear combination of all features. Features like he was a male or a female, the passenger was in first class, second class, the passenger was how many years old, okay, and the passenger was what's the occupation of the passenger. So all those features, they will be inputted here in z as a linear combination, and then this z will be applied to this final function, and the output will always lie between 0 to 1. If it lies between 0 and 0.5, we'll say the person died, and if it exceeds 0.5, we'll say that yes, the classification is true and the person is alive. That's about it. Now let's go to the nice part, hands-on. So we'll start with the hands-on of linear regression first, and then we'll move to logistic regression. Okay. Okay, so Apur, could you please confirm whether or not my screen is visible? I mean, should I zoom in?
Your screen is visible.
No. Should I zoom in? Should I zoom in a bit?
No, it's okay. A little bit maybe. Just
okay.
A little. Okay. Perfect.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so welcome to the Hackslash/ML session notebooks for 19th October. Now we'll be starting with linear regression. So, while doing the explanation of the slides, I have cleared most of your concept about what linear regression is and what data set are we going to use. The data set we are going to use is real estate house price predicting data set for regions in California. So this is the data set that we are going to use. And so what we essentially want to try is, so given that we have the historical data of houses price that were sold in California, we want to generate a model so that if a real estate company inputs the features for a new house going up for sale, then we can get an estimate what should be the optimum price that this house must be sold for. Okay. Now we'll import these libraries first. NumPy as NP, pandas as PD. Again, please everyone copy this in your local, so that I won't be able to go and run these cells because it may take up quite of time for connecting the runtime and stuff, and it may hamper my internet connection and sharing also. So I won't be running these cells; they are already run, and there are graphs plotted also. So if you wish to run, you copy this, make the copy for this notebook in your local, and get on with it. Okay. Import NumPy as NP, pandas as PD, matplotlib.pyplot as PLT, and Seaborn. Okay. So similar to matplotlib, this another beautiful library for visualization called Seaborn. And this Seaborn is essentially built over matplotlib. So any command like plt.set fixed size or plt.show, they work with Seaborn also. Okay. And this decorator %matplotlib inline, what it does is essentially for this interactive, it starts up the interactive Python shell and asks that if any graph is plotted, please allow it to be displayed within the IDE itself. For Jupyter Notebook, if you are using Jupyter Notebook or Google Colab, then you don't need this line. This line is optional. But if you're using VS Code or some other editors, then you can use this line. Okay. Now, this data set California housing train.csv, you might be wondering that so we have not shared this data set with you. We have shared the Titanic one. Why so? This is because this data set is available by default in every Google Colab notebook. Click this button here, 3 buttons. Okay, go to the file section here and wait, let it connect to the runtime. Okay, so here you will have this sample data. Inside the sample data, you will find by default California housing test.csv and California housing train.csv. So you don't need to copy anything, and you can directly put this file path here, pwd present working directory, and sample data California housing train.csv. Okay, now this will be stored in df here. Now we shall explore the df.head. It will return the first 5 rows. And okay, so this df.head, essentially, if you leave it empty, it will return the first 5 rows by default. Or if you want, you can use 6 also or 7 also, anything such that. Now we see that we have this median house value, which is our target to be predicted. This is a target column, median house value, and these are the features: longitude, latitude, housing median age, total number of rooms, total bedrooms, population density, households nearby, and median income of the family. Now, I'm sorry. Okay, now if you run this cell df.columns, it will return you all the columns of this data set in the list format. Now this is quite a good function here. df.describe, I use it most often. This df.describe function gives you the count, minimum standard deviation, minima, maxima, upper quartile, lower quartile, everything as grouped by as columns. For each column, it will give you this total count of entries, mean and standard deviation, maximum, upper quartile and lower quartile, and it's very good. It's very good when you perform feature engineering and stuff. We'll see it later. I think here itself you'll see it in this notebook. Okay. Now again, this function df.info, what it does, it returns the info about number of non-null count. So what this non-null count means, there are every data set is not perfect. In some data set there may be some entries that are missing. People don't generally they hesitate to give you all the information about themselves, so there may be some fields empty. So this non-null count, this column tells you that how many rows in each column is null. So as we can see here, our data set now it's a perfect one. We have all the entries non-null, 17,000, all of them non-null, and the data type for each one of them is float 64. I mean, all the columns are continuous. Okay. Now, first we'll talk about feature engineering and data science. So what essentially is the role of a data scientist? The role of a data scientist is to study the trends in between the different aspects of data. So here what we'll try to do is we'll study the trend, we'll study the effect of median income, total rooms, households, and population. These 4 columns as compared to median house value. Okay. So I mean, we are basically studying how this median house value, our final prediction, will be affected by these 4 columns. Now we'll make a list of these features, features being all these columns, and now we'll loop through this list. For feature in features, sns.lmplot. Again, you can go to the documentation of Seaborn to see what this lmplot, it essentially means linear model plot. It is used for linear regression graph plotting. You can go in the documentation for Seaborn and search this lmplot. So we'll say sns.lmplot linear model plot. For x, we will put this feature. First of all, x will be median income, and for the second graph, it will be total room. For third graph, household, and for fourth, population. And y will be median house value for each graph. Okay. And scatter equals false. This scatter equal false essentially means those dots, those coordinate points that were shown in the graph. So we have turned it off. So it will give us a better visualization. Now this line, so we have the lines only here. So what this line is more or less to give us the rough idea about the trend. That's the reason why I have turned scatter to false. And now you also need to define the target data set from where you are pulling these relations. Now our target data set is named as DF, as you can see. Okay. So if you run the cell, you obtain 4 graphs, median house value versus median income, as you can see. As median income increases, median house value increases. It's natural. As number of total rooms increases, the median house value again increases. As number of households. So what households is number of households nearby. As number of households, obviously people would like to live in a good locality, a good neighborhood. So as number of households increases, the median house values increases. And as number of population, this is population density. As population density increases, median house value decreases. Why? Because none of the bungalows would be built on main India Gate Chowk of New Delhi. It will obviously be built on some suburbs of Gurugram or Haryana. So basically people prefer to live in serene places. The posh houses, the bungalows, they will always be in serene places, not in densely crowded ones. Okay. And yeah, everyone, please feel free to ask any doubt if you may encounter. There's Apoor, and he'll help you out with your doubts in the chat section. Okay, moving ahead. Now we have this plt.figure fixed size we'll set here, and now we'll try to plot this median house value against housing median age. What is the age of the house? Now, if you will plot here, this is the bar plot function. For plotting the bar graphs, this Seaborn has this bar plot function. Now, if you plot this graph, what you see here is as housing median age increases, this is a linear, this is a consecutive scale, this is an ascending order. So as the housing median age, as the age of the house increases, there is no direct effect on the housing value. I mean, you see, the house which has 48 years is lower in price than the house which is 3 years old. So what we can see that this column housing median age has not much importance in predicting the selling price of the house. So what we'll do is we'll later remove this column. You can see here, yeah, this one. See, someone is asking me in the chat that how can we delete the entries. So this is the way for deleting entries. df.drop labels will specify that what column we need to delete, and in the axis we'll specify along what axis. Axis equal 1 means the whole column. Axis equals 0 means that whole row. So we'll drop the whole column of housing median age because it has very less contribution, in fact no contribution towards the final price of the house. Now let's see what about latitude and longitude. How do latitude and longitude affect our median house value? So what essentially are latitudes and longitudes? Latitudes and longitudes is essentially a coordinate on a graph, isn't it? A place, how is a place represented on a map? Using x-axis latitude and y-axis longitude. That's the same thing that we are doing here. We are plotting a map of the California county. Okay, so this each blue dot or orange dot that you are seeing, it's essentially a house. What we'll do is what we are doing here is we are dividing this house into the houses into two parts. The posh houses, those values are above the upper quartile. The upper quartile, as I have obtained from the df.describe method, the upper quartile was 265,000. So these orange dots represent the 25% houses, upper 25% houses, and the green dots, they represent the lower 75% houses. So what we have done is we have set the figure fixed size, and in the same figure we have plotted two scatter plots. So this scatter plot is essentially plotting points with coordinates on a graph. So scatter plot, first one being x latitude, y being longitude, where df of mean house value is less than the upper quartile range. Now this target data set is we are plotting only that much data where the median house value, final price of the house, is less than the upper quartile. So this will print the blue dots, and again similarly if you revert it into greater sign, it will print the orange dot, the costlier houses. Okay, I actually love this methodology of printing out a map of a place using just graphs. Please let me know in the comments whether or not you're enjoying this map plotting thing. This is quite a Easter egg kind of thing using graphs. Now similarly, okay, so as we've already talked about, we'll drop this housing median age, and then we'll again check the data frames head, and now see this housing median age has vanished. Now we'll start with training the linear regression model. So for training the linear regression model, what we do is we divide our data set into two parts. We'll place a line here. Essentially this median housing value, it will go into other part, we'll say it y, and the features, this will go into different data frame, we'll say it as x. So what we'll do is first from the sklearn. So this sklearn is a library called scikit-learn. It's a very standard and beginner friendly library for machine learning in Python. So it can be installed using pip install scikit-learn. Now this sklearn, from this sklearn package will import the linear model library and the linear regression class. Okay, so this linear regression class is the one used for linear regression model framing. Now we'll divide a data set into two parts. X, only the features. So what we'll do for obtaining the features, we'll say df.drop labels equals median house value. I mean the target label we are dropping, and apart from those, everything left will go into X. So essentially the features will go into X, and for Y, we'll just take up this target value, median house value, df of median house value. This will our target column will go into Y. Now what we do is we'll split these X and Y further into X train, X test, and Y train and Y test. So this X train and Y train, it will go for the training of the model. Okay, so we'll give this X train features to the model. It will result some output, and that output will be compared with the corresponding Y train, the value, the actual historical value that we have given to it. Okay, and that will based on the error there, our model will automatically perform that cost function and gradient descent thing. And now after the model, once it has done training, we'll give it the X test and take out the predictions, and we'll compare those predictions with the Y test here. So what's the code for this? From sklearn.model selection, import train test split, and then we'll pass in a tuple of 4 variables, X train, X test, Y train, Y test is equals train test split on X and Y. We'll pass this X and Y, whatever we have created here, X and Y test size. This is how much data you are wanting to separate for testing. So this 0.33 indicates 33% of the data will go to X test and Y test. Okay, sorry. 33% of the data will go to X test and Y test, and remaining 67% will go for training. And random state means to pick out the data on a random basis. I mean, it's not that out of the 17,000 column, the first 13,000 will directly go for training. No, it will pick out this data points at random. It will pick out the entries at random. So this random state, it's basically a seed, what you want to set it. You will set it to anything, 100, 100, 200, 99, anything. Now we'll create an object of the linear regression model class, and we'll say that object to be LM. Let's suppose the object is named as LM. Now what we'll do is we'll fit this X train and Y train. This training data will be fitted on the model using this fit function, lm.fit X train and Y train. Now when you run this cell, it essentially trains your model and returns an output that yes, your model is trained, and these are the best suited parameters for your model's training. Okay, so it happens all automatically, and the model will automatically choose the best parameters. Now after training, we'll store the predictions array. We'll pass the X test to this model, and we'll call the predict function on the model. The trained model here is LM. So we'll say lm.predict, and inside the predict we'll pass this X test, the features for testing. So our model will make predictions and store them in the predictions array here. Okay, now we'll plot this predictions versus the actual Y test, the actual historical labels provided. Now what did I say you? If this Y test versus predictions roughly forms a straight line, as you can see here, if it roughly forms a straight line, that means that yes, your model is performing good. So it's not that good a line, but again, it can be improved further. So since we have just used the California housing train, there's also a California housing test that can also be used for for more training. And similarly, we'll be creating a distribution plot, sns.dist plot. It's a distribution plot for creating a histogram of Y test minus predictions, the residual errors. What essentially is Y test minus predictions? It's the residual errors. So we'll create a dist plot of residual errors, and remember a point that for a linear regression task, if this Y test minus predictions, if this residual errors comes to be normally distributed like this, a bell curve format, then you can assume that yes, your model is training in a good direction. You can train it further, and it will be trained in a good direction if this residual errors are normally distributed. Okay, so for evaluating the regression, as I did already say we need to evaluate our data because it is supervised learning, so we can evaluate also our performance. So these are 3 types of evaluation: mean absolute error, this is a formula, mean squared error, and root mean square error, RMSE. So for implementing these functions from the sklearn itself, we'll import metrics. We'll import the metrics library, and for first of all, we'll print, let's suppose, root mean squared error. So for root mean squared error, first we'll print from this metrics library, we'll call the function mean squared error and pass our actual y-test that was historically provided to us and the predictions made. We'll pass them into this mean squared error function, and again this mean squared error function will be passed to square root function of the NumPy library np.square root. So what it will do is, this is the mean square function and this is the root part. So it will return root mean squared function. Similarly, mean absolute error will be returned by matrix.mean absolute error function and will pass y-test and prediction. So you can see this is a result here. So how will you read this? So RMSE basically means the root mean squared error is of $70,114 and mean absolute error is $51,224 and 319 cents. So this is your first taste of ML. Now, up till here, any questions, anyone? Any doubts, any questions? Good. Moving ahead. Okay. So Sajal, you may go ahead and paste it out in this chat section, and I'm sure Apur will be there to help you out. Okay. Thank you. Now, meanwhile, we'll be starting with logistic regression. So time is of the essence, and we are left with just 15 minutes. You know, we can we surely would also like to have a Q&A session to clear our doubts. So we'll have to spare some time for that also. So for this session, we'll be winding up our logistic regression, a bit faster. So okay, bear with me. For logistic regression, we'll be using the Titanic dataset from Kaggle, as I already said you, and in fact, I had already explained you quite detail about the intricacies of our dataset, what all columns are present there, and what do we need to predict, and how does logistic regression work. So we'll skip these parts. So this is essentially importing all the libraries, and that dataset, whatever dataset that has been shared with you, you will first copy it to your drive, and inside your drive, make a notebook, Colab notebooks. And in that Colab notebooks, put your dataset. So then this will be your file path: present working directory, drive, my drive, Colab notebooks, and Titanic train. So how will you access the files from your drive to it? You will just click this file button here, and you click this button. This is mount drive. So what mount drive does is, when you click on this mount drive, what it does is, all the files of your drive will also be visible for use here. Then you can provide this file path for Titanic train.csv. So we'll explore the head of this dataset. So we have passenger ID, survived, passenger class, name, sex, age, SIB, SP, and PARC. I don't know what that is, but we'll surely see that whether or not it has something to do with that prediction, whether the person survived or dead, and fare, cabin, embarked stuff. Now, if you do the train.info here, you can see that for this cabin column, we have only 204 non-null values. Most of them are missing, and for age we have few of them missing. We have 704 non-null values. Now what we'll do is, to have a better visualization of this null and non-null values, we'll plot a heat map here. This is a type of a graph in Seaborn library, and you can use this heat map. You can refer to the documentation. So heat map is used for plotting plotting continuous variables, continuous features in data. But here we have used to plot discrete data. How we have used this? For heat map, the data which we are going to use, which we are going to plot is train.isNull. We are going to plot all those data in the training set which are null. So this train.isNull will segregate the data which are null. We are going to plot them. White tick labels have been turned to false because no use here in this graph. And C bar, this is a color bar. This allows you to see what is the value according to the color. Now this this 1 means empty. 1 means solid navy blue, this brinjal color, it means empty, and 0 means full. So all these are full. And in the age, you see few of them are empty, and in the cabin most of them are empty here. Okay, and this is a C map, this is color map. It can be anything. You can try pastel, magma, iris, many things here. Okay, now we see that the age column has a bit of missing data, and cabin column has a large amount of data missing. Now we'll plot a graph between the survived. We'll plot a count plot. So what this count plot does is, it counts. It plots the total count of anything, any column that you have that you have specified. Suppose I've specified the column here survived. So what it will do is, inside the survived column, I have only two classifications, either 0 or 1. So it will print the classification for 0 and 1 here. Now U, I have also defined another variable here, U, as sex. So what essentially it will do is, it will further segregate the survival and death into gender. So as you can see, among those who are dead, the 0 ones, more of them are male and lesser females, and the survived ones, more of them are females and lesser are males. Okay, so this is the count plot, and this is where the U comes into play. Now, similarly, we'll again use the count plot for survived, but this time the U will be passenger class. So we'll see that how passenger classes affected survival. So for those who have not survived, majority of them were from the third class. Obviously, the world is bad, and for those who have survived, the majority of them were from the first class. Okay. Now, again, so what we have seen is now for the age column, we have a few of the missing data. So what we'll go ahead and do, we'll try to fill in that missing data. This is called data engineering. So how we'll fill in this missing age data? We can't simply put in the median. Put in the mean age in each of the NA columns, each of the null columns. We can't simply go ahead and put the mean age of the data set, because data set age also has obviously age has something to do with people who are saved or not. So we'll see how the age has varied according to passenger class, because most intuitively, passenger's age would be according to his class only. I mean, if someone is from the first class, he or she will be older, because as you grow old, you earn more amount of money and you can afford a first class ticket. So that's why I have plotted a box plot. Box plot basically plots the mean of one column as respected to other column. So here what we'll see is, for passenger class 1, the mean age is around 39. For second class, the mean age is around 29. And for the third class, the mean age is around 23 or 24. Okay. Now what we'll do is, we'll fill in the missing ages of the data where the persons whose age are missing, will fill in their missing ages based on their passenger classes. So this is a function, I won't go into the intricacies of these function, but essentially it does see if pandas dot is null, if the incoming age feature is null, so it will return 1. If passenger class is 1, it will return 37 as the age. If passenger class is 2, it will return 29 as the age. And if passenger class is 3, obviously it will return 24 as an age. And now we'll pass in the age and passenger class column and apply this function, this refine age function, what we have described here. We'll apply this refine age function on each and every entry of this age and passenger class column, and the output, this return age output, will be stored in this age column will be overwritten by the returned output. Now again, if you make the heat map here, you see that this age column is now full. We have no missing data here, but the cabin has missing data, much amount of missing data. So what we'll do is, we'll go ahead and drop this. Okay, we have dropped this cabin column. In place equals true means the changes will be taking place in the actual data set only, no copy. Now again, if you see this head here, we have that cabin option gone. Now see, you have this column, like this sex column or the embarked column, you have it in the format of string. And an algorithm, a computer can't operate on string. You need to pass in a value, a number for it to operate. So there is another thing called one hot encoding. So what we'll do is, we'll convert this categorical, this string will be converted into number. For instance, let's say we'll make a column here male, and if he's a male, we'll put it here 1, and if a female, simply 0. So then what can happen is, we can drop this sex column. Similarly, for embarked, we'll do the same thing. If it's S, we'll put here 0, else we'll put a 1 for C. So for that, we'll be using this pd.getDummies function. So getDummies function, and we'll pass in this column, that categorical column. Drop first equals true. I won't go and explain this. Please look for it for yourself. And for this column, it will convert this into one hot encoding and store it in this column. Let's suppose we have made one column here and stored this dummy variable here. Similarly, we'll create the dummy variables. We'll do the encoding for embarked category also, and store it in this embark variable. Now we'll drop these 4 variables, these 4 columns, sex, embark, name, and ticket, from the training data set. These will be dropped, and the encoded columns, these 2 encoded columns, they will be concatenated. We'll use this pd.concat function, as Apurva has already explained in his presentation. We'll concatenate it with the actual training set along the y-axis, because it's a column, so axis will be 1 for concatenation. Now if you see the training.head, now see, yeah, it has created this male class, and if 1, it means a male, if 0, it means a female. Similarly, that Q and S and C, they have also been converted into one hot encoding. Okay. Now, so we have our data set ready for feeding into the model. Now we'll go ahead for the creation of logistic regression model. So similarly, from that sklearn linear model, from where we have imported the linear regression, we'll import this logistic regression, and similarly we'll import this train test split again here. Now our X will be everything apart from the survived column, because this is our target prediction, whether the person survived or not. So X will be everything apart from the survived column, and Y will be the survived column. Now again we'll segregate this X and Y into X train, X test, Y train and Y test using this train test split function, where we'll define X and Y as these X's and Y's that we have created, and test size. This time I'm taking 1/4. This time I'm taking 1/4 of the data set as for testing, and 3/4 for training. And random state 101, 100, anything can be. Now we'll make an object of this logistic regression class, logistic regression model. Name, we'll save it as model. And these two features, max, iter, and solver lib linear. So this solver lib linear, this solver feature is an interesting thing. I tried it, I experimented it on my own, and for this data set in particular, this solver equals to lib linear is working perfect. So I have used it. Solver is lib linear. Now what you can do is, you can go to Google and simply Google solver for logistic regression. So there are several other types of solver, like one is LGFS, another is SAG and SAGA. So these are some other types of solvers for logistic regression. You can try learning what are these. So I won't go in the detail of solvers, because these are basically the mathematics implementation of internal mathematics. Now we have declared the model. So we'll train the model using this model.fit function. We'll pass in our training sets X train and Y train, and this has returned the model according with the along with the best parameters that was there for our model. So you can see the best parameters solver as lib linear and intercept scaling and maximum number of iterations performed on the data set, random state, everything. Now we'll take out the predictions by passing in the X test, and using the model.predict function, we'll take out the predictions whether the person, as mentioned in this X test, whether the person survived or not. Now, how to evaluate the classification task? For regression task, you knew that, yeah, we can evaluate using root mean squared error. But how to evaluate for classification tasks? For classification task, we'll evaluate using classification report. Similarly, as from where we included that RMSE and MSE, from that only sklearn.matrix will import classification report and confusion matrix. Classification report will print the classification report by passing the Y test actual historical labels and the predictions that we made. And now what this classification report returns is, it returns your accuracy, percentage of your correct responses. This accuracy is 83%. I mean, it's basically 83% of the responses were correct out of the total 223 responses. 83 were correct. But to keep in mind, one thing to keep in mind is, for best evaluation of your model, the best evaluation of your model will be when you go with this F1 score. For a classification model, the best evaluation metric will be F1 score. Now, what I suggest you to, what I encourage you to do is, go and check out the documentation for precision, recall, F1 and support. Okay, for all this four, you check out the documentation. And why I'm telling that F1 is the best fit model. One hint is because it's a harmonic mean. It's a harmonic mean of precision and recall. Now, how does harmonic mean minimizes the deviation? So that's up to you to find out. It's basically statistics. Okay, so this is how you evaluate your classification model. And similarly, one more thing, we have confusion matrix. So confusion matrix will pass your Y test, actual Y test, and predictions, and it will return a matrix here. How to read this matrix? So along the left diagonal, this 126 and 58. So these are basically your correct predictions. Okay, if you add all the four, it will give you the total number of entries in your testing data set. And if you add the left diagonal, it will give you the number of correct assumption made. So this 126 represent the persons who were dead and were actually classified as dead, and 58 represents the person who were not dead and were actually classified by the model as not dead. Okay, so this is your correct response. So you can calculate the percentage again from here also. And yeah, congratulations, you are finished with logistic regression also. And now back to our slide. So we have done with the hands-on, and this is the extra notes from the content which were used in the slides. So you can refer to this towards data science article for cost function and stochastic gradient descent. I would ask Cecil in the meanwhile while we'll be having the Q&A session. In the meanwhile, I'll ask Cecil to copy these links and paste it in the chat section. So this is a towards data science article for cost function stochastic gradient descent, and this is a logistic regression notes, handwritten notes on logistic regression. Similarly, these are notes on linear regression. And so ML is not just limited to linear or logistic regression. ML is a vast thing. Okay. So I'll suggest you is to go to Coursera and check out this IBM's ML course. IBM's ML expert course. It's named as ML expert course. It will not only cover the basics of data science, but it will cover many advanced algorithms also in ML, like natural language processing or big data, or let's say support vector machines and decision trees. And there are in fact, for regression, just for regression, there are 100 types of regressors. ADA boost regressor, SVG regressor, random forest regressor, countless. And the beauty of ML lies in understanding how the math works behind each of these different algorithms and what algorithm to apply in the best fit in your data set. What algorithm will be the best fit in your data set depending upon the trends and features of a data set. So this was about it, and let's begin with the Q&A session. Okay, so I'm stopping presentation here. Okay, so that was about it. Now we'll begin with the Q&A session. Paritosh sir, are they allowed to unmute themselves?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Okay, so anyone, if you have any doubts, please come ahead.
Okay, everyone. I wanted to tell you one thing. If you had any problem in understanding any of the algorithm during the session or any command, you can always check the documentation provided by Shivam or by me. So you will get clear about what the specific commands or functions are.
Cecil, please. Cecil, are you there?
Yeah, I'm there. I'm pasting it.
Okay, Cecil, yeah, please paste these slides here. This extra notes on content in this Q&A session. There was actually one thing one thing which I saw in the chat section here. Sejal asked that whether these functions like mean, squared error, and RMSE, they are inbuilt or not. So see, yeah, as Apu rightly said, they are inbuilt and you can't change their implementation. But like for implementing log loss function, the implementation of binary cross entropy function can be quite hectic if you do it manually. But for smaller functions like RMSE or mean absolute error, you can try and implement it on your own. I mean, it hardly it's what it's just an iteration. It's just an iteration over your entire prediction list, and for each prediction list you are subtracting it from the actual historical value present there, squaring it, and then finally after all the iteration you are averaging it by dividing it up with the total number of observations. So Sachal, you can go ahead and try that also. Locally, you can try that
no,
also.
wait a minute. I think he wanted to ask that if we can you can use the shorthand notation for the specific function. Like we use the dot mean absolute error. So like as we do in NumPy, so we import NumPy as NP. So is there shorthand notation like for the specific function? So if there is a mean absolute error, so can we rename it to a shorthand notation? So I think we can't do that in.
No, yeah, we can't do that.
The inbuilt can, so
Pushkar,
that's a problem.
Pushkar has a doubt on what basis the portion of Y test and Y train is decided. Okay, so that's a good doubt actually. So see, the basis for this decision of Y train and Y test is actually what we do is, let's suppose you have a data set with 17,000 entries, like the data set that we had in our housing prices. So it had 17,000 entries, if you remember. So what we do is, if we have a large data set, at least a data set exceeding 10,000 entries, if we have a data set at least exceeding 10,000 entries, then what we can do is we just simply keep the ratio for 33 to 67. Okay, 33% of them go for testing and 67% of them go for training. But if in case you have a data set which is smaller, like for the second one, the Titanic one, we had just 891 of the features, 891 persons we had. So that data set was small. So what now I need to do is I just divided it in 1/4 and 3/4. Why I did? Because I wanted to have more data. At least I wanted to give the model some sufficient data so that it can train itself nicely. Okay, it's obviously in instead of 891 entries, if I had 2,000 entries, then I would have gone for 33 and 66. Okay, because in that case, even 66% of 2,000 would exceed 800. So my model would have sufficient amount of data for training. Okay, I hope that clears it up. Pushkar?
Yes, according to different scenarios, we use the train and test portion. So, well, you have to choose it wisely according to the number of the number of data you have. So, well, it is recommended that the test the test size should be less than 30%. Well, it is recommended, but you can choose from basically 10% to 30%. Well, according to the size of the data set. Okay, do we have any more doubts?
Thank you, Sajal, for sharing this course link and these documentation links. And we can, yeah, all of you, I would highly suggest you that if you wish to begin your journey with ML, so go to these courses like IBM's ML course. Why I'm specifically emphasizing on IBM ML course? Because there are several other courses also, but there is one course which is more famous than this IBM course. But some courses use MATLAB and Octave as a language. But I personally believe that Python is the language which is best suited for starting your journey in ML. Now, it's obviously up to you. If you find any other instructor whom you prefer or whose teaching methodology you like, you can start with it. But ML course, this IBM's ML course is also quite at par with those courses. And above of all, this Coursera courses are free. If you don't want a certificate, you can just audit the course and start learning. It's free of cost. Can you share the Matplotlib documentation, Apur, please?
Okay, just a minute.
Share along with Matplotlib. Share that for Seaborn also.
Okay.
Okay, so yes, actually, Sechal, I would like to I would like to first say that this is a very genuine doubt. Most of us encounter this doubt, that should my data science part be clear before moving ahead with ML. So essentially, ML is what? ML is a consequence of data engineering and data science. ML is a consequence of it. ML is not a new domain. So obviously, if you wish to pursue something which is a consequence of something else, you should first pursue the base. You should first clear the basics. So yes, this charts, graphs, and data engineering and linear algebra libraries like NumPy and Pandas, you should be quite clear with them. That yes, how you can if any random, because see, in real life examples, the data sets will be huge in the sense there will be 2 million to 3 million entries in your data set. and for all those many entries, there will be several of the columns that are, many of the columns that will be null, and several of them that that have some other encodings, but you don't understand what encoding is, what that encoding is. But still, you can't simply omit those columns. Why can't you omit? Because you have to figure that, yes, what is the essence of this column, should I keep it or not? So for all those, you need to be well efficient and well versed in what type of graph should be used in comparison of what type of variables and what columns, which graph is best suited for the visualization of this problem, what should I use. So that's the point which will help you go ahead with your data science task, and consequently build a strong model with a strong accuracy. I hope it's clear. Okay, so for the data science course, if I have shared that IBM's ML course, you can see here, if you go in this, is my screen visible, Apur?
Yeah.
Okay. Where can I guess this courses? Yeah. See, this is the first course. This is a specialization. This IBM Machine Learning Professional. It's a specialization in which you have 6 courses in total. So the first courses of all those 6 is exploratory data analysis for machine learning. This is all the data science. I mean, not all, but almost 70 to 80% of the data science that you're going to need for your machine learning tasks. So this first course of this specialization, which I have shared, this is sufficient for beginning, because see, it covers all the features, like it covers SQL databases in APIs and clouds, how to handle categorical and ordinal features and missing values, a variety of techniques for detecting and dealing with outliers. There is one more common problem of outliers that you'll face when you dive deep into the data science part, and why feature scaling is important. Feature scaling is also one more aspect of this ML thing. Scaling is essentially what? Scaling is essentially, let's suppose you have data in which some of the values are smaller in between the range of 0 and 1, and some of the values are in millions and lakhs and 10 lakhs. So if you put all those models together in the data, the model will be all confused up while updating its weight. So you need to scale down all the data together at one level. So many such tasks, and all of them will be they'll be cleared in this course, the first course of this specialization, I guess. Yeah. Okay, so I hope again that was clear.
Okay, so you want the collab file? Okay, I think it is shared before only. 1 minute. Oh. Okay, so this is the one. These are the collabs one. Okay,
And in fact, I would encourage every attendee here. I would encourage all of you to go and try and experiment on Google Colab. What Google Colab is, not just for ML tasks. I mean, any script in Python. Like designing web servers, or designing, automating certain tasks. All those can be done on this interactive Google Cloud environment or Jupyter Notebook Anaconda environment. So this interactive Python is a cool way to get tasks done.
Yeah. Well, I recommend you to, if you want to run it on your local device, you better install Anaconda. So you can install it. You will get a Jupyter Notebook and well, all the libraries pre-installed in it. I think we can wrap up this session. If
Yes,
anyone has any doubt, you can type now.
Paritosh sir.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sir, so yes, sir. So I guess that if they're clear with the doubts, then if anyone else has any doubts, then yeah, you are always free to ask here. And if not, then sir, you may proceed with the wrapping up of the session.
Yeah, we can proceed with the wrap up, I guess.
Okay. So so all algorithms are all going to be learned and practiced in the course of IBM. Obviously, Pushkar. Obviously, these algorithms are what which renders you the power, which renders you the ability to decide which model, which algorithm should be used to train your model in which type of data set. Obviously, if you'll have the practice about how an algorithm works, what's the idea of implementation of each algorithm that you will learn in this course. If you have an idea of that, if you have a strong understanding, solid understanding of this mathematics underlying it, so it will naturally come to you when you see the data set, when you plot the graphs, it will naturally come to your mind that yes, this is the trend of the data in this data set, and accordingly I should apply this algorithm, because it will obviously, it will be natural. I mean, if you dedicate yourself to learning ML algorithms, and if you dedicate yourself to these course, I am 100% sure that it would someday be natural for you. Like just when you see the data, when you plot the graphs, you see the trend, it will by default come to your mind that yes, what to use here. As simple as that. So yes, they need to be practiced. Well then, I guess with no doubts left, this proved to be quite an interesting and quite a well helpful and knowledgeable session for all the attendees here. And I would like to thank Hackslash for giving us the opportunity to interact with you guys. And it feels honored to be the one to give the attendees here a head start into the world of ML, into the domain of ML. And thank you so much for listening to our talk, to our session. And we have several interesting sessions planned ahead in the future, in the coming days also, starting because it's a week long thing. So let's meet tomorrow again at this same time of 6:30 p.m. with same energy and enthusiasm, and wish you all the very best for your journey ahead in machine learning. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all for listening and showing your interest in ML. So thank you guys.